Thanks very much, Bronwyn. It's terrific to be here today, but I must confess to being a little nervous after following a terrific keynote speaker, Ethan, earlier. So thanks for setting such a high benchmark for the rest of us to follow. So it's great to be here today, and I'd like to start by paying my respects to the traditional custodians of the land we're meeting on here today, the Whadjuk people. I'd also like to acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contribution they make to the life of this city and also this region. I'd also like to acknowledge the peoples of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners of the land on which Wyndham is being built. I pay my respect to elders both past and present and also emerging. As I said, I'm so pleased to be here today to speak with you about some great examples of urban renewal, as a number of us experienced just recently from our UDIA study tour of North America. So Bronwyn's asked me to focus on some of those key learnings from the States. So I've picked some examples and I'll talk you through those shortly, but I've done that sort of through the Wyndham lens. So I just want to tell you a little bit about Wyndham before I talk through each of those key examples of, place, people sort of led development. As Bron said, we're one of the fastest growing cities in the country. We're one of the youngest populations and also one of the most culturally diverse as well. Over the next 20 years, Wyndham will almost double in size to around 500,000 residents. Bronwyn earlier used the example of Tasmania, but it's also Canberra as well. And you think about the sort of dynamic city that Canberra's become over the years, the level of infrastructure and so on. In that city's considerable as compared to an area like ours. Just a quick stat again, just to provide a bit more context. So 100 babies per week being born in Wyndham, which is pretty phenomenal when you think about it. Think about the sort of challenges that presents, also the opportunities. And we also have 13,000 new residents coming into Wyndham a year. So again, huge numbers and growth that we're dealing with. As I said, we've got a really very culturally diverse community with over 50% of residents born overseas, coming from about 162 countries from around the world. Today's session, the focus, as you know, is really the hardware of place, so getting the planning, design and infrastructure right. Thanks to town teams for the definition of hardware of place, and what they've defined the hardware of place as being are the physical attributes of a community. They're usually delivered by urban designers, landscape architects and engineers, including obviously roads, trees, footpaths, utilities, services, etc. Whilst these are vital things, they don't give place a soul, a character, a feeling, a vibe, which really speaks to the heart of Ethan's presentation earlier. I've been asked today to talk specifically about some of the studies that we looked at, or the areas we studied as part of our trip in North America, and highlight some examples of urban renewal. I've chosen 2 examples of the trip to talk you through in detail. However, I'd have to say at the outset, 2 really important things were reinforced to me from that study tour, and that is that we are actually doing a pretty good job in an Australian context. And for us, Wyndham, it really did validate a lot of the foundation setting and a lot of the work that we've already been doing in placemaking, but also in our work that we do with partners and that community-led citizenry that we've really focused on in terms of the way that we engage community in designing place, even places that don't exist yet, and how we pop up around new development and so on. The other key takeout from me that I'll focus on with these examples is the work and the power of being able to partner constructively with the private sector. We can actually learn from some examples in the States around some of this collaboration with the private sector. Obviously, they've got a different legislative framework that makes this a lot easier for them to do than us at times. But there are some of those examples that I think we can really learn from. I've chosen to speak about 2 examples, Mission Bay in San Francisco and also Noma in Washington, DC. While these areas are located over 4,500 kilometres apart, a recent article in the US Today highlighted a familiar characteristic of both. The article was looking at the top 25 richest cities in America and found that both San Francisco, Oakland, Hayward, where Mission Bay is located, and an area close by Noma featured in the top 25. These examples are well serviced by public transport and in close proximity to jobs, 2 important ingredients, of course, for the recipe of success for any renewal. Mission Bay in San Francisco is a 303-acre neighbourhood on the east side of Union Square. Originally industrial district, it underwent development fuelled by the construction of a university, and that's the University of California, San Francisco. So the Mission Bay campus was established, including residential developments, and most recently, in fact, the month that I visited, the establishment of a stadium, the Chase Centre, was opened, a major entertainment centre and home to the local NBA team. Similar to my second example I'll go through today, much of Mission Bay was previously a rail yard and an unused land. So this whole development really came about sort of reclaiming that land that is now home to 6,400 housing units, and about 30% of these are affordable housing. 4.4 million square feet of commercial space for office and entrepreneurs, labs, a state-of-the-art medical centre, of course, supported by the university, research buildings, public open space, a public school, and also the first new branch of the San Francisco Public Library in 40 years. And also an estimated 56 biotech companies. So it's quite an interesting development that's occurred over the time. Mission Bay is expected to create more than 30,000 new permanent jobs, in addition to hundreds of ongoing construction jobs. And it's been interesting to sort of see that transition over time. The development began in 2000 and will take place over 30 years. So it's a really bold long-term vision. And it's expected to exceed $4 billion US in terms of the overall cost. The extensive site was guided by the Mission Bay Development Group, a private development company who have redeveloped Mission Bay to its current standing. While some of us find the notion of working with private developers a bit uneasy, particularly given, we often question some of those motives, the Mission Bay Development Group is an example of activating private capital to renew prime land that's underutilised in close proximity to the San Francisco CBD. The development group worked hard to ensure that the community have been involved in the development of their suburb, collaborating in the planning and design and ensuring rigorous public input into the development of Mission Bay. The other example that I wanted to highlight, and I will email you some links to some of these case studies, was NOMA in Washington DC, and this for me was a great example of that sort of inner, renewal that can occur in areas that were previously industrial, in and around transport zones. This has become an amazing place that people really want to live and spend time. It's got a great feel about it, and it highlighted to me how developers can partner with public sector and, most importantly, community to really create a great place, and really building on certainly some of the examples that Ethan used earlier. We need to do much more of that in an Australian context when we think about our activity centres and bringing in that vibrancy. It's almost the curation of space that becomes important, and I think certainly in a Wyndham context, we've really seen how we've been able to do some of that curation, activating place by pop-up cinemas, and again, using sort of low-cost opportunities to then create market interest and really generate that sort of private investment that then flows along. I think that linkage between people having that sense of place, the activity, places where people feel comfortable to come is really important. And often in the greenfield developments that we're involved with that are often developer-led, the sort of basic infrastructure's there, but it's really absent of life. It's absent of people milling around. And often I think we as a council need to be sort of much more a leading edge in the way that we can plan and program these spaces, but also at the same time building capability and capacity within community to actually lead that into the future, as well as those communities shape and develop over time. I'm really interested in understanding the placemaking concept insofar as it relates to private investment and seeing ourselves, as councils, as part of the marketplace, and traditionally we haven't done that. So I think placemaking is something that we've absolutely embraced and will continue to do so. What I think we can learn from some of these examples in the States is how we then look at partnering with the private sector to actually, get that sort of value capture and, places becoming much more exciting for people and reflective of the communities that they are obviously part of. So thank you for that, and I'll hand over to the next speaker. Thanks.